And Karen is gonna tell us all about raised bed gardening at the 30,000-foot view.
Yes, I won't go into great detail on every kind of raised bed you might be interested in doing because there are so many types. But this, I hope will give us a little taste of what options might be out there that we hadn't thought about before. And I am Karen Turner, happy to be part of this garden club. Hello, John. I didn't realize you were the John that was coming.
Speak up.
Today we're going to talk about raised bed gardening, the 30,000-foot view. How many of us here have a raised bed? It's very common in this area because of the soil quality is poor. We sometimes want to make amendments, things like that. So there are many different kinds of raised beds, as many types as there are people potentially. The sizes, the shapes, the materials, the concept behind them varies widely. As you can see here, they can be as, well, we'll get to that later. Many materials, many types, many shapes. Whoa. This is the first time I've used this. I'm trying to make it get smaller, but it's not getting smaller.
Maybe use both hands to squeegee it together.
Like a magician?
Oh, that's
Yeah.
something. Yeah. I call it.
Thank you. Why use a raised bed? One of the biggest reasons I think is to build soil where the ground soil is poor, which is one of the cases here, anyway, on my property. Also, build soil where ground soil is contaminated. And I've heard of this in other parts of the country where, for whatever reason, the soil is contaminated with maybe salt water, maybe chemicals. You don't want to grow your vegetables in the soil that's there, but you can build it up or grow in pots. And so that's a way that people get around that. You can create a specific soil environment. Maybe you want to grow blueberries. That's my next project, and they need more acidic soil. Maybe you want to grow a lot of root vegetables, and so you want to build that raised bed soil to be looser, maybe more sand, so that the vegetables, the root vegetables, will grow as large as you want them. Maybe you need to improve drainage, or create special watering options. As we'll see a little later, you can create raised beds in ways that conserve water. You could install a watering system into them. I've seen that done. You could even use the self-watering concept where you water from the bottom. As Pat Strockbine gave us the pot method to do that, you can do that in a raised bed garden also.
Wicking.
The wicking garden, yeah. You would tend to have fewer weeds there because you're building your soil, and it's less stooping, it's easier access if the bed is higher. And so that can make weeding easier also. And these can be wheelchair accessible. So it just creates better soil and more accessibility, I would say, and gives you watering options. What are the types of raised beds? And again, this is not all-inclusive because there are so many types. The shape and the building materials are virtually limitless. My raised beds are built out of cinder blocks. Many people use wood. You could use stone. And when you come to wood, all kinds of wood, boards or logs. When deciding on the size, because they can be any size, but consider the accessibility, as you can reach over and work about 2 feet, so you don't want to create a 6-foot long bed, that's going to be hard, or an 8-foot long bed, that's going to be virtually impossible. But there are ways around that size also, as we'll see. So the simplest, the simplest, I would say, type is just add compost onto your existing soil and plant into that compost. You don't need to put an edge on. There are reasons why you might want to put an edge up, it looks neater. You keep things where they're supposed to be. You can create paths between the beds, but you could just raise it up with layers of compost. Over here on the top, on the right on the top, you see boards that were used to build the beds. And then down on the right, they've got these little half logs to build the beds up. And here are the trusty cinder blocks. I've seen gardens, I don't do this on mine, but I've seen gardens where they might plant herbs or other little plants on the openings in the cinder blocks also. So that kind of expands your space a little bit. What happened to my other picture? You can make them out of metal. And you see the one on the right is constructed out of flat metal on a framework of wood. Here is an invisible picture that used to be a purchased bed you can buy. They're made of corrugated metal. Some of them are square, some of them are kind of oval. Some brands are Birdie's beds. Vigo has beds like that. And so you can buy those in a kit to be mailed, and almost certainly the stores around here could provide them also. I did not take the time to call local hardware stores and gardening centers, but they almost certainly would have those too. Keyhole gardening. Keyhole gardening is a technique that started in Africa as a way to conserve water. They're round. They have this keyhole in the center where the name comes from. And you can see in the very center of the cylinder, there's a receptacle where you put your garden waste and other things that you want to compost. And you water the garden from there too. One of the keys to keyhole gardening is to fill it up with plants, as this one is filled, because that serves as kind of a living mulch to keep the moisture in. When you water from the center, the roots tend to grow toward that center. And so they're growing toward the nutrition that the compost is forming and toward the water. So it's a way to conserve water through a keyhole garden. And these can be made out of any materials, which is one of the reasons why it worked so well in Africa. It was a very dry place where these started, and they could use any materials they have. So this one, plastic, around a frame of wood. You could build it out of stone. You could build it out of corrugated metal. I have, my raised beds are keyhole gardens, and they're built out of cinder blocks. They can be very beautiful and charming, and they can be very utilitarian. These U-shaped gardens also are handy to extend the space you have available to put your plants in, but still maintain that accessibility. So you can walk in, have your, reach to the center from this side or from this side. And there's the fancy schmancy version over there. And I have seen some online that have built-in fencing all around them too, to keep deer out. And again, these seem to be made of wood, but you can find them in metal or whatever materials you want and have accessible. Some specialty gardens. So this is one view of the self-watering wicking garden. You build, and you can do this with any types of these materials in gardens. Line them with plastic, construct a reservoir at the bottom where the water pours in through this, and then use kind of a system of weed cloth and other supports to keep the soil up above the water line, and so that the plants can reach down and pull the water up from below, and that's another water-saving method. I have a few
So then you just water the whole garden using one hose?
Yes,
And just make sure your reservoir is filled up?
yes, yes. And they, in the instructions, I don't have a lot of resources listed at the bottom. Google is your friend, you can find all of this through Google, but there is a video that I've linked to that, gives specific instructions on how to build these, so that you keep the water level where it's supposed to be, it doesn't get overflowed, but it's deep enough. An example of a wheelchair accessible raised bed, and there are many, different styles. This is hugelkultur. I've seen this image several places, and I myself doubt that this is gonna stay that steep shape for long, but it gave a good example, and on the side, what you're doing, you're kind of filling the base with wood that is going to, over time, rot away, but it creates compost and nurturing for the hugelkultur. And you can get cute. Here, someone has used an old bathtub as a raised bed. And wouldn't that be a cute idea for kids, to get an old kid's swimming pool that maybe has a hole in it? It's seen better days, but you could poke some more drainage holes in it and let the kids plant in their own little bed. How do you fill it, especially these beds that are high? And some of them are quite high. First, if you have burrowing critters in your area, I've not been bothered by them, but in other places I've lived, voles were a big problem, or moles, or other burrowing creatures. You can line the bottom with hardware cloth to keep those critters from climbing up. And when you fill, it can be as simple as just compost. If you've got a low bed and you're trying to enrich the soil, you can simply get some bags of compost or a truckload of compost and fill it that way. If you're trying to fill a higher bed and you don't want to spend money on 4 feet, 3-4 feet of compost, which the garden doesn't really need to go that deep, and it would be very costly, you can use other materials. Check into lasagna gardening, which is a layered type of gardening where you lay down layers of straw, sticks, logs. It's
Rocks, I got lots of
you could
those.
do rocks, and I saw on one of the raised bed gardening Facebook groups, I guess, some people said, oh yeah, I put empty wine bottles down at the bottom, or soda bottles. I thought that was weird, but if it bulks it up and raises it up, works for them, I guess. And a lot of these, when you do your research and look in, a lot of things might not be for you, like choice of materials. Some people, when they choose their wood, they'll get pressure treated wood to build their garden out of, but that's pressure treated and got chemicals impregnated into the wood, so I would steer clear of that. Other people say, no, they use different materials now, it's okay. To each his own. Look into it, there are lots of options. And you could, that's not supposed to be bulk-culture, that's supposed to be hugelkultur. So, but on deep beds, you can use a hugelkultur style building where you start with large logs, sticks, scrap wood from what blew down from your trees, and then build it up using layers progressively of less bulky materials until you end with compost on top.
Is there specific like types of yard trimmings like woods and stuff that we need to stay away from for agriculture?
I think most things would be fine if they will compost. There's black walnut trees, I think, exude, if anybody has specifics on this, let me know, but I think black walnut trees, or walnut trees in particular, exude a chemical that is bad for any plant that's not that walnut tree. So,
Is that similar to like the cedar that we have in this area?
I think cedar would work.
Oh.
It might not decompose as well, but I think it would work.
Okay.
I've never heard advice not to use it, I'll put it that way.
Okay.
I've have only heard warnings about the, black walnut. And hugelkultur, yeah. I think where I was going with, and somehow that turned into bulkiculture, but it's use bulky items at the bottom to bulk that up. So how do you find out more? Because there's so much. Google is your friend. I got my keyhole gardening information from Deb Tolman's website. She's a professor who lives farther north in central Texas, and she spent time in Africa and saw the keyhole gardening concepts and thought, Texas, perfect. So when she came back to the United States, she started kind of an effort to introduce that method here. And some of the components of that, it's not just the keyhole shape that's key, but filling it full with plants, so you get that green mulch effect. Watering and fertilizing only through that central column. And sloping it up, so the soil, there should be a foot difference between the perimeter of the circular bed and where the soil hits the compost ring in the top, so that water and everything kind of flows down. Vigo Garden Tips. Vigo is one of the companies that sells those corrugated metal beds. And so their website has a lot of tips on raised bed gardenings, and they have quite a bit of information on filling the bed. And do-it-yourself self-watering beds, the wicking beds, I think it's a garden center, and they've got also quite a detailed video on how to build one of those self-watering where you water from the bottom. Does anybody have any comments, suggestions, experiences with raised beds that they would like to share?
If you use decomposed or decomposing oak leaves, is it better to wait until they're decomposed if they're at the bottom? I know not at the top.
My opinion, I'm not an expert, my opinion is if they're at the bottom, they're gonna decompose before they cause a nitrogen blocking problem.
Yeah, if you do it at the top, yeah, you end up with issues.
And I have heard that if you don't wanna, what you don't wanna do with decomposing leaves is dig them into the soil. I have heard that if you use them simply as a mulch on top, the bottom will decompose over time and it's not gonna be a problem. Again, you know, everybody has a different concern, so.
I used it as mulch and I got a lot of growth, but not a lot of fruit.
Didn't work for you, yeah.
One of the things that I noticed on mine, and I bought 4 of those ones from Tractor Supply, and they have a V-shaped bottom on them, which turns out I don't like that, right? The other thing that I wish I'd done is, because they're up off the ground, so if you have any that you build up off the ground, you gotta think about what's underneath, because that's now my dog's favorite place to dig dirt, all the weeds, grass that's hard to get to and mow or whatever. So put something down that's gonna keep that from happening, right? That's,
What was the purpose, what was the selling point for the V shape?
I don't know. So what I do is the stuff that needs more root is in the middle, and the stuff that needs less root. Another thing too, on my other garden, I use cinder blocks. And on the end ones, usually the 4 corners or even others, herbs or marigolds or whatever that's gonna help fight insects. So I put those into those end ones.
A protective fence of marigolds.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we found is, as we were sharing the hillside where we live, we used Hermitize. And thank goodness the person that was selling them to us said, "You're not planning on putting in a vegetable garden, are you?" I went, "Well, yeah." And this is, now with these, you absolutely have to protect it from the Hermitize because they contain creosote,
Creosote.
which has been tied to cancer. So, I
I've heard that, I
So-
believe that.
Yeah, so if you're using railroad ties for anything, anywhere, even if you wanna use them to make steps, going down to something, don't plant anything around them that you're gonna eat at all, no herbs, no anything, because apparently it's quite bad.
That's how I started out in one of mine. I was using railroad ties because I had a bunch of them. And then I figured that out. And so now they're around the outside of the garden to keep from critters getting inside the garden. So they're outside of the 6-foot fence, right?
Yeah.
And, yeah, that was learning.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm gonna be doing water wicking next year in that garden. There ain't gonna be nothing that is just, that watering once a week thing, that sold me. When Pat did that, it was like, sold! I'm gonna figure out how to do that. Now I'm a tub hoarder, so I got tubs everywhere.
And I have used tires in the past too, and used tires to raise up for potatoes, and then started thinking, maybe
Yeah.
not a good idea. So I've got a lot of tires, I have used them since then for flowers, but not for.
Nothing you're gonna
for
eat.
Something you're
Yeah.
gonna eat.
I have a friend that had grandson get burned to the point of going to the hospital by sitting down on railroad tie steps, and it absorbs the heat and will burn.
Wow.
So,
They have that oil.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they-
yeah, that's how they- you
Yeah.
can't get it on.
yeah, and you can't get it off, just like he said. It was quite a big deal.
Any other questions, comments, suggestions?
Are we able to get this printout through?
We will post,
Melissa?
when we post the video on YouTube, if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, because the more subscriptions we can get, of course, like and all that, but once we get up to 1,000 people subscribed, then we'll be able to actually YouTube this live. I won't have to try, it's a pain in the,
Wow.
to get this uploaded, because a lot of times it's very big. But be sure to subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, and then what we'll do is she'll send me a copy of this, and I'll post it as a link to that. Once I post it, then I'll just post this as a link. It'll be in the description or whatever, so you can see these slides.
The previous, Melissa was able to draw up, and then for those of us who don't do all this very well, I can pay her for sheets of paper for printing out the previous ones. Will that be available?
Yes, that will be
Thank you.
available. And I had sent this PowerPoint presentation to her, so she should have that now.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you can probably get that printed now.
Well,
Any other-
we have 2 other presentations, the previous one and the previous one. So the bee one that we did 2 times ago, and then Linnea's from last time are already on this YouTube channel. And the links to their presentations are there as well.
How about her first, Linnea's first?
If you go onto the Garden Club website, on the Lake Hills Library, and then you click on Garden Club, it's at the far right-hand top. And then down in there, you'll see Raising Tomatoes, and what else? The Rain Bees guy that was doing the water thing, and then Linnea's, what was it called, a weed walk?
The
or
Weed Walk.
Yeah, weed walk or something. So the
Okay.
presentation slides are right there.
So Larry's son, SUNN, government worker for, advice for rain catch.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Was there.
yeah.
Yeah, his presentation is there too.
Yeah, and the Rain Bees have a really robust website too, that you can go on and pick and choose the information that
Thank
you want
you.
on water catchment and water use.
Thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Okay, so, wow, we're moving along. Hang on, let me stop the recording so we can just go straight into the business meeting. And